We're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. Yeah, some folks will be in person.
Megan, we'll begin.
The governor will be joining us at 2 o'clock, but for now, I'd like to ask Seth to call the roll.
Governor Kissauber. Julia Brim Edwards.
Julia, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Yvonne Curtis.
Present.
Matthew Donegan. Here. Samuel Henry. Here. Nicole June Maher.
Present.
Mark Movahel. Here. David Reeves.
David, are you on the phone?
Ron Saxton. Mary Spildy.
Here.
Kay Turan.
Here.
Hannah Bendering. Dick Withnell. Here.
So I think we have a quorum, so we'll move ahead with approval of the minutes. So I'd ask for unanimous consent to approve the meeting minutes from the October 14th meeting of the Oregon Education Investment Board. Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll move to recommendations for achieving the middle 40. And these recommendations are in your packet, and I think I'd like to start with a motion, and then we'll move to discussion. And I think Ben and David, who are members of the committee, are here to answer questions for us.
You want a motion?
I'd like a motion to start the discussion. Yes, please, Mark.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second, Samuel. Thank you. So discussion about the recommendations, and first I'd ask Ben, would you like to make any comments?
Sure. I think emailed to the board, or staff emailed to the board, answers to questions that were posed by board members at the last meeting where this report was presented. So hopefully folks have had a chance to review those. Agnes Balassa, the governor's workforce policy advisor, is in the audience today. She, from the governor's office, really helped to put this task force together, and would encourage the board, if there are additional questions, to engage her as well in the discussion.
Thank you. David, did you want to make any comments on this report?
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Any further discussion by board members? Okay, hearing none, let's take a vote. All those in favor of approving this report as recommended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on then to the Chief Education Officer update. Dr. Golden.
Thank you. Well, I've been spending a lot of time around the state, but now for a while I'm going to be spending more time in Salem. It is the time of year and the time in the cycle that it's important to be in Salem and available to people. So you do have my report that tells what I've been doing in the last few months, who I've been connecting with. I just wanted to comment on the next agenda item, which is the Oregon Minority Teacher Act status report. I'm just so happy we're having this report. I think it's so critical. And just this last week, I met with a group of amazing African American leaders, and they were talking about if they could say one of the most important things is that we have to have the faces of our staff reflect the faces of our children, and not only how critical is that so that our children see all the possibilities for them in the world, but that we really do create the kind of environments that are really culturally responsive, that we're teaching in a way that's culturally responsive. I know this has been a priority, and I know it's a priority in the report, but I just want to also acknowledge how important I think this is. And of course, it's not only having people get the certifications, but it's also making sure our interview processes are inclusive. It's making sure we retain all the new staff we have. And so I just want to preview the report with that.
That's your report?
Yeah.
Any questions for Nancy? Okay then, let's moving right along. Let's move on to the report that Nancy referenced, the Oregon Minority Teacher Status Report, and I believe we have some guests.
We're waiting on one of them. He's driving in from Eastern Oregon. He was planning to be here at 1, so I've just texted to make sure he's nearby.
Are we ready to move on to the accelerated learning report then, and then come back to this item? Would that work? So that's you, Hilda. Thank you.
Notebook, yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot earlier
No,
than
just
you
needed
planned.
to get the right notepad.
Okay, great. Thank you. And this is in C-tab.
You should find a colorful cover page for the executive summary and a
Tab 5.
1-page fact sheet. So, for the record, my name is Hilda Rosselli, and I have the privilege of working with the OEIB staff to focus on areas related to college and career readiness. And with that, had the opportunity, after Nancy was appointed by the governor, to serve on a task force that grew out of Senate Bill 222. Nancy asked if I would support the committee that was formed and appointed by the governor to move forward with some major elements that were key to ensuring that more of our students were able to access college credits while they were still in high school. Now, one of the issues that came up immediately for the committee, which was made up of Senator Hass, Senator Starr, Representative Huffman, and Representative Frederick, Peyton Chapman, principal of Lincoln High School, and Nori Juba, who's on the school board for Ben Lapine, and as I mentioned, chaired by Nancy. But as soon as they began their work, they were asking, well, what have we done in this area already? So we began with looking at the work that had come forward around dual credit, and looking at where we were with advanced placement and international baccalaureate programs, and then really honing in on a goal that the committee really wanted to focus on. And they felt as though the one thing that the research was telling them was that access to as few as 6 credits of college-level coursework has a notable impact on not only high school graduation, but movement forward into post-secondary programs, whether it be community college, industry certificates, or four-year institutions. And we also were able to look at our own state data that was done 2 different times by the Oregon University system, examining the impact of dual credit on students' outcomes. And again, it was very clear for Oregon that this really made a difference, not only just in high school graduation, but also in looking at the retention levels for students who moved into post-secondary programs, their GPAs, and their degree completion rates. So given that, the committee really wanted to focus on a goal, and they settled on the fact that if we could ensure that every high school made available to students while they were still in high school at least 3 college courses, we would be making a significant difference towards 40-40-20. And we would also be really helping students experience what it was like to take college courses. We also had a lot of conversations about the fact that there are students who are clearly college going. They have maybe from 4th grade on, known that they were going to college. But there were a number of students who maybe didn't see themselves as college going, and if they graduate from high school and have never experienced what college coursework is like and been able to see themselves as, I can do this, then we lose a large number of those students who may never move on. So given that goal, as you can see, the committee spent quite a bit of time looking at recommendations that would improve the systems, would align what's happening between high schools and post-secondary, would simplify the communication to parents. I have to say, it's quite confusing. If it's hard for us to get the information about all the options in their names, imagine what it's like to be a parent, trying to find that information for your child. And we spent significant amounts of time hearing testimony from colleagues that Nancy invited to come in and share about what's happening as they look at funding these programs. And so what you'll see on your executive handout here is really the goals, not only the goal, but the idea that this would support a college-going culture. It would look at aligning the funding across both partners, and it would ensure that we had some real outcomes to be able to share about whether or not this was making a difference or not. With that came a very detailed discussion about two major areas. And I think this one was on every single agenda of every meeting, and that was that right now there are barriers that are faced by the dearth of instructors available to teach dual credit courses in the high schools. And it's a multifaceted issue. First of all, we do have college faculty, some of whom are not fully working. They may be working part-time as a part-time instructor, but there may be restrictions for them to come in and teach under the certification requirements for high school teachers, and there's also an issue about scheduling, etc. There was also, however, another issue, and that is that Measure 5, several years ago, sort of shifted the focus of many of the educator prep programs in this state. So whereas we used to have a large number of candidates who graduated with a master's degree and maybe had that master's in the content area, Measure 5 really shifted away from that, and a lot of programs moved to what's called the Master of Arts in Teaching, where the master's degree is what gets them their license, but it's not a master's in the content area. It's a master's in education with a heavy emphasis on pedagogy. So with that discussion, we really looked at a variety of mechanisms. Nancy and Ben and Rob convened faculty from the community colleges particularly, and listened to some of the issues to try to resolve some ways to simplify or clarify a structure that would result in some very dependable and timely decisions around qualification processing that has to go on. In other words, there's a schedule issue that comes into effect, and we had heard that there were different outcomes that some institutions were deliberating on. The same person might apply to more than one institution, but got two different decisions in terms of their qualifications to teach the same course. With that, we also looked at what research was done around other states and policies. We looked at the possibility of online courses that four-year institutions could offer during the summertime when teachers have time to take the required graduate hours in the content area, knowing that that might need some stimulus support to get universities coordinating that and making sure that it was totally available for teachers. And we also began to talk about a band of classes that we really were focusing on primarily. We're talking about those next math classes, the Writing 121, a Biology 101, a college success course that could be earning college credit, and a CTE class. So we're not talking about the full range of classes that instructors or that community colleges and four-year institutions offer, just a band. And what we also looked at was the fact that right now in some of our community colleges, there are some differences in how those instructor qualifications look for a 100 level course versus a 200 level course. So you'll see that there are some recommendations that were laid out in the legislative report, which was due October 1st at 5 o'clock. It was turned in at 4:59 electronically. I just happened to look at the timestamp and I went, boy, shoot, just in time. With that also came a recommendation that was taken to the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee of OEIB, and an outline for how funding could be supporting the particular outcomes that we're trying to achieve for our students. So a price tag estimated at about $15 million was proposed, and I'd like to kind of lay out for you on the fact sheet how those dollars were reached, how that figure was reached. First off, understanding that the current process for funding, which it means that high schools generate funds that from the, or receive funds from the general fund for every high school student. That process would continue. The idea that community colleges and four-year institutions may generate additional FTE, and I'm going to say why may in a second, that would continue. However, there was a caveat to that. If a community college has reached its enrollment cap, then picking up additional offerings wasn't going to change their budget process and support the additional courses. So we had to find a way to look at how to arrange these funds between the two institutions. Currently, what we learned was that many of our partners have reached agreements, sometimes a handshake, a memorandum of understanding, but I think sometimes it was developed without a true sustainability model in mind. For example, if I told you that you could offer a college credit to students at no cost, and we could do that for $10 a credit, you would all understand why that is a terrific deal. When you think about it, there's still instructor time involved, there's still advising, there's still transcripting, there's still the connection that has to be built between the partners. That's hard to sustain. And so with this particular set of investment recommendations, we looked at how could we impact the kinds of outcomes that you really want to see for students. The very first item, where it says number 1, was looking at an additional $20 per credit that would be earned for the first 3 courses that a student took, dual credit courses that a student took at the high school level. This is not talking about students who might be taking coursework at the community college or college level. I should have said that earlier. And we spelled out where we thought the short gap was in terms of where people were running short on funding, and that was to engage regularly together, either through professional learning communities or meetings that ensured the academic rigor and outcomes of the courses, so that the institutions could all say with confidence, that course is exactly where it needs to be in terms of academic rigor for a college course. It also was to provide some support for the students that may need additional advising around, by the way, if you take this course, you have to think about how this will fit into your plan when you transfer, being aware of how financial aid could be impacted, and also, very important for some of us, a support to make sure that the data came back in a way that we could actually bring it back to you and to the legislators and to the governor. Right now, you have to go to about 4 different places to find all of the data that encompasses anything that students are doing while they're in high school that might lead to transferable courses. The second investment recommendation was specific to really capturing those students in either dual credit or advanced placement and IB courses that particularly we see as underserved or underrepresented in traditionally in the data that we see from our own 4-year and 2-year institutions. And this means that there would be a real engagement about talking with parents and with students about the benefits of taking these courses while in high school. And not just looking at those students that might be all, already saying, I'm going to college, but offering these opportunities and encouraging students to take advantage of this, even if they hadn't seen themselves as college going. The third amount was specifically looking at the fact that advanced placement and international baccalaureate programs are seeing such an increase in the cost of textbooks. To be able to keep the materials where they need to be for those students, there was an additional amount that would be generated if those first 3 courses that a student took were in an AP or an IB program. And the 4th area was acknowledging the cost of replacement of equipment and special instructional materials that may be required in a career and technical education course. As I mentioned earlier, there were some ideas for strategic one-time investments, particularly when we looked at the analysis that Ed Northwest did for us around high schools in our state. That probably is my time up. But we believe that we're looking at close to 200 high schools that may not offer any dual credit, that may not offer any advanced placement. And so we really thought about, and I always think about it when I drive through towns like Bly. It's one of my favorite little towns. I like the name of it. But I try to think about, are the offerings for students at the local high school that those students attend the very same as right down the road here? So this would be a one-time investment to convene the people, the partners, that need to sit down and figure out what's best for that local community, as well as finding ways to really develop a blended advising model that takes the expertise of our post-secondary partners and our high school partners together to support students. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, to find a way to provide more online coursework for high school teachers that are seeking to add that qualification to their license. So at this point, I think I'm going to stop and take questions, comments. What is happening right now is that the legislative report was turned in, and because we were early enough in the year, the committee was able to start thinking about what elements of the report might need to appear in legislation. And so they began drafting a legislative concept, number 274. That has been vetted broadly with a lot of different groups to get feedback, to improve it, to try to see where we might not have thought of something. And as we speak, the last iteration is being done and will probably be available at tomorrow's Senate Interim Education Committee hearing.
Thank you, Hilda. Samuel. And then Mark.
2 questions. Hilda, Dr. Roselli, I'm presuming that this is these moves, which I want to congratulate you and the group on, are going to address what we've had in terms of a significant problem where upwards of a quarter of the students who receive high school diplomas went to community colleges, but because of the test indications that they were below the where they needed to be in order to start community college work or post-secondary work, that this group is going to be, that these measures are going to address that population. That's the first question, and while I got it, I'll ask the second. And that is, you mentioned about some of the small towns, and you and I both know that some of the smaller places, smaller high schools feel rather isolated from this. And so one of the questions is, are there going to be some specific outreach to some of the more smaller and more rural situations that we have?
Those are both excellent questions, and they also offer me a chance to emphasize that the word transferability came up often in the courses that were discussed. What Dr. Henry is alluding to is the issue that we have that is acerbated by the fact that if a student perhaps is not taking a full load of courses, maybe hasn't taken a 4th year of math, and then moves on to high school and takes a placement test, that lag time when they were not engaged in moving forward can very well result in placement in a developmental education course. And some researchers, Yuri Theismann being one of them, likes to call developmental education the Roach Motel of higher ed. Now, I say that in Florida, people understand what Roach hotels are. They're little bug traps. But the idea here is that this is one step in a mosaic that was laid out by Rob and Ben for you recently at an OEIB meeting, where if we move all of the pieces in the right direction, for example, helping students use their smarter balanced assessment scores to waive placement if they're moving directly on into college, or using a full complement of coursework during the senior year and not having that lag time where I'm not taking academic rigorous courses and then place developmental ed. So I don't see this specifically addressing it by itself. It is one of a piece of mosaic parts, if you will, that together will address that issue. Your second question relates to isolated schools, and there was a long discussion about this relative to the fact that we have a different technological set of tools available to us now. We wanted to balance that, however, with the fact that some of the students that we're really trying to reach may benefit most when there is a person in the classroom supporting that online learning. I think we've all, if you've tried taking an online course, it takes a lot of self-motivation and getting yourself to figure out how you're going to make the time to do it, because there's no class period that you're attending. And so the wording in the legislative concept encourages online learning, just says it shouldn't be exclusively offered online. There should be some kind of a support mechanism in the classroom.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mark?
I'm just trying to process how you can have roach trap and Passaic in the same paragraph.
Maybe that wasn't appropriate to share.
Hilda, this accelerated learning in the governor's budget, we have about a $21 million ask in there. It's 15 for the accelerated learning, 6 for the developmental ed that Dr. Henry was discussing. Can you maybe just reflect a little bit on the actual intent of what's been budgeted with the report?
I'm actually so pleased to have Danny Ledesma in the room because I believe that probably unpacking the governor's budget, it would not be appropriate for me to do that. And so I think that's probably a question that at some point we're going to be able to see a lot more of those details spelled out.
And maybe just, if that'd be fine, maybe that's a topic for when the governor comes, but I maybe just draw attention to, for the group, that there's been a great deal of work, and I really applaud Hilda because there were so many isolated initiatives on this accelerated learning. And when this doesn't give justice to the amount of fragmentation that she's pulled together that we've put in a budget package for pretty aggressive initiatives. So I just wanted to thank you, Hilda, for everything you've done, and to just call out that is funding this initiative in OEIB is pretty critical.
Thanks, Mark. Yvonne?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that for the rest of the board, that this is this whole area of 11 to 12 with accelerated learning embedded in there is an area the Best Practice Committee continues to look at all the work going on. Definitely applaud the work here, and I know that Dr. Golden's so smart to have Dr. Rosselli be on this project because she's so great at keeping track of all the variables and weaving them together so that we can understand. I really appreciate this document. I just want to call out one other thing, and I know Hilda's already heard me say this a couple of times, but I just want to call it out for the rest of the board, and that is that there is still another barrier that requires dollars, and I think there's some work to get it addressed in another way, but I'm not exactly sure, and that is that for some students, depending on where you get the dual credit from, the cost of the credit is a deal breaker for some of our kids. So in some places we can get it for free, some places it's $10 a credit, other places it's $100 a credit. So even if the high school is getting these funds to help students get these credits, if they can't pay to take the test and get the credit, then what's the point? So I just want to make sure that stays getting addressed somewhere. It could be done in agreements, it could be done in MOUs and some of the other work that's being done around those barriers that kids meet. So I just want to keep putting it on the plate.
Thanks, Yvonne. Any other? Matt?
All right, thank
And
you.
then sounds like Dick.
It was excellent report, thanks for all that. I just want to make sure that I'll further reveal my status as a non-education expert. I just want to make sure I understand the strategic objectives and then kind of what we're doing to meet those objectives. Is the primary goal really to target students that might not otherwise go to college? That seemed to be the essence of the preamble.
I think that was very much of the focus. Using the equity lens that the OEIB has adopted, certainly the conversations were trying to say, where are we not yet reaching the students that we should be able to help move along that path?
So then success would look like most of the 15 million or however much we ultimately is directed really to those target populations as opposed to funding kids that might just want to get a head start on college, that we're going to go to college anyway, right?
In this particular piece of legislation, that is the way it's laid out.
So in terms of the mechanisms to achieve that, I see bullet point 2, which is a financial incentive. And I'm wondering if there are other mechanisms to achieve that in terms of student selection, and in terms of just really directing how the money flows so that we don't look back and see that the money funded kids that were eager enough to start college that we're going to, while high school, that we're going to do that.
Well, I think that was why, using some of the good thinking of others in this room, the funding was set up that the high school would not receive that additional fund unless the student met that criteria. And particularly even spells out, suggests how those funds should be used to generate recruitment and selection of other students and helping them understand advising issues that they might need to have a better clarity around in terms of assuming those or moving towards those credits. So the two sets of dollars that, or the one set of dollars here that would go towards students is really only generated if the student meets that criteria of underrepresented. And right now, that might fall to the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission to actually define that term. It's used in other pieces of legislation. It might be that the HEC further looks at that in detail.
I just want to play that back and make sure I understand. So the criteria then really establishes who's capable of receiving, who's capable of even taking the courses. Is that while in high school?
Well,
okay, go ahead. Sure.
the funding doesn't do that. That's where the advising supports have to come into play. And I think that once the schools are really called out to say, what are you doing specifically to attract students who you aren't seeing in those advanced placement courses, you're not seeing them in the dual credit that might be available in your district, then there will be that reach out to those students to say, here are some options for you. And by the way, one of the courses that's been recommended, and we just heard this morning that Eastern Promise, 1,000 credits generated this year for the college success course. That's a perfect course for somebody who didn't even see themselves as going to college. First of all, it would give them a chance to complete their FAFSA, to look at their planning and think about their lives and where they're going, what they want to do, and experience real rigor of a college course that does transfer for credit. It is an elective credit, but it's a course that many of our colleges already require and suggest for students to take to ensure that they have the study skills and experiences necessary to be successful. I'm hoping I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. When you say the student, the support advising, is that under bullet point number 1, the $10 or the $20 per credit?
And also in the explanation of how the funding would be used in the in number 2, where it says develop and offer instructional student skill supports.
Well, one last question, sorry. So also under the recommendations in terms of that are directed towards instructors themselves, it's my understanding this is mostly to take the current instructor base and kind of retrofit them, if you will, to make sure that they're qualified. What about actually looking at the Measure 5 requirements themselves so that the future pipeline of instructors that are coming out are qualified as well? As that also on the table?
Well, again, I'm glad I'm joined here by my colleague, Vicki Chamberlain, Executive Director of Teacher Standards and Practices. There has been some discussion about, with the new teacher redesign of licensure that's underway, whether or not we actually might be worse off, because we now have a variety of programs that offer an undergraduate degree, and you can indeed, and still be a very qualified instructor, earn your license through a 4-year degree. So then I think you could think about customizing the kind of add-on classes that people could add if they're a high school teacher wanting to move forward, and those could be then taken into a Master of Science of Education degree that then that teacher might generate. But we're watching carefully to see whether or not redesigned licensure goes either promoting that process or maybe even moves people farther away from a graduate degree. And we do know that for college success courses and for the CTE classes, they don't have the same requirements for instructor qualifications.
Okay.
That's the question I would have. Where does the technology student go in this? I see Chuck Lee here in our audience, and they're starting up a new technology school here, tech school here in Marion County. So,
well, the intention of the committee from the very beginning was that that's a very viable option within a course that could be offered for dual credit. The one concern that has to be addressed is that if a student decides to take a particular course that is acceptable and a required course for a particular associate's degree or industry certificate, that may or may not transfer if I change my mind and then decide I want to go to a 4-year program and major in anthropology. So that's the advising component that has to accompany the decisions that a student and their family make about what options are best for me at this point in my career, but very much recognize the value and intention of those courses being a valuable resource for students.
It's the same the other direction, though. The anthropology class isn't going to be much good if you're trying to go into vocational training.
Absolutely. However, the general education requirements might be very useful if I'm going to go towards an associate degree or a 4-year degree.
Any other discussion on this report? Seeing none, there's, oh.
Yeah, this is David. I think certainly accelerated learning has a lot of potential both for high school and college success. I would just like to make sure that there is something called in the report for regular meetings of educators ensure college rigor and student success, and that we do maintain that connection, however it is, between the college faculty and administrators and those in the K through 12 system, to make sure that the rigor is maintained and the right kind of assessments are done, and that what is actually carried out in high school with college credits or in other ways that high school students are getting college credits are meeting the quality and standards of a regular college class. And I just held it the intention that the OEID is going to be overseeing the implementation of this and that coordination between colleges and high schools, or is that yet to be determined? So it's a somewhat open thing in the report at this point, and I just want to make sure as we're going forward that's clear whose role that is and what steps can be taken to start overseeing that implementation and maintaining quality and contact between high schools and colleges.
David, thank you for that question, and I'm also looking at Nancy because I'm sure she has some thoughts about that, but I can't imagine that any work that is done in the grades 11 through 14 continuum isn't constantly brought back to this committee. And if you look at the full report, Appendix G at the very end actually lays out the kinds of information that we think we should be systematically being able to share back with the OEIB, with legislators, and with other interested stakeholders to be able to know whether or not we need to tweak the system or to make it more viable and sustainable. With that, however, I do want to call out that that was a thread that ran through all of the conversation, was the importance of ensuring that academic rigor. We looked at a variety of models where in some cases there are professional learning communities where faculty from the colleges and universities and high schools are meeting regularly to not only identify these are the outcomes for the course, these are the assessments for the course that tell us that the student has really mastered the material, and then in some cases they're actually co-evaluating the assessments, looking at student work together to improve the process. And we believe that all of those are absolutely essential. That's why the first item number 1 was spelled out as that $20 needs to be paying for the meeting time. That's faculty buyout sometimes, or a stipend, or a substitute for those partners to sit together on a regular basis and review the courses, make sure that they are still maintaining the rigor that they're expected to.
Nicole, did I see it?
So first of all, thank you. I think there's a lot of really good work and thought into this. And I apologize if I missed this earlier, but the one kind of remaining question I have is that it seems like a lot of this work is really built on the assumption that all college advisors and counselors are created equal. And every time I've had an opportunity to speak with at-risk young people, so often their most traumatic memories and their most painful experiences were from instances where they felt like they were treated with bias, or that assumptions were made about their capabilities and aptitudes based on their socioeconomic background or racial and ethnic heritage, oftentimes from that very advisor or counselor. And there's actually a lot of research that supports that as well. And so I'm just curious what supports or strategies we'll be using to ensure that our counselors and advisors are actually up to the task of serving students who have historically not been identified for a variety of fair and unfair reasons as college-bound, or who have not identified themselves.
So I think that's a very important question, because one of the reasons that the idea of a blended advising model appealed in some ways is that it allows a convening to really bring together folks from throughout the state to really lay out what constitutes the kinds of responsive, student-based approaches that we have to use when we say we're advising or we say we're counseling students. And right now, there is no real presence around that across the state. Some partners, work that out between themselves, but there's no framework or standards that remind people, how are you embedding the equity lens into your work? How are you looking at students through more than one lens to determine this is a student who we should help move forward to take these courses? So that is why that was inserted there as a one-time strategic investment to convene people to actually come up with what a blended advising framework should look like in today's world, and particularly for our state.
Any other questions or discussion?
This is Julia on the phone. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please do, Julia.
Yeah, so first I wanted to say, great work to the committee and Hilda for creating a more seamless system. One question I had, and maybe this is for a future meeting, but I'm wondering if there's been any initial analysis done of the attendance compacts were submitted and around the metric of the 3 college level courses, and so what are districts forecasting for setting targets for going forward, and then what do we anticipate the movement to be around those numbers based on fairly significant investments? I don't know if Hilda or Danny or maybe Nancy to respond to that.
Yeah, Peter is the person who's working on the analysis of the achievement compact.
He's on the phone.
Peter, are you on the phone?
Yes, yeah, and we're literally working on that right now. I want to point out that this measure is the only one that currently is not calculated by the ODE. And so we're working with ODE to get that collected, the baseline data to be collected. But in terms of what the district set as a goal, that's something that we're analyzing and we'll be presenting at some point in the future.
So it'd be great to get what the sort of aggregated forecast is, and then a disaggregated number as well, because as referenced earlier, I think you can see a wide variation across schools, across districts. But to be able to look at that, and then based on this investment, long term, whether that's moving the dial or whether we need other investment strategies to help districts meet their forecasted or their goals.
The one thing that I will tell you is that I think by now, and I'm looking to Ben to see if he might know more about this, I had a chance to preview the D4A system that the Community College Workforce Development Office is using. And I found for the first time I could actually sort out a little bit more of that. I'd be very willing to work with Peter and combine what we can glean from that along with the achievement compacts. I think it would give you a pretty thorough picture.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Looks like we're finished with this discussion. There's no action required on this report. So thank you very much, Hilda. So I think I'd like to confer with Nancy and Lindsay about process right now, because I know we're expecting the governor at 2 o'clock, and I want to make sure that the Oregon Minority Teacher Status Report is given in total and not segmented out, a piece of the report and then the governor and then coming back to it. But I want to make sure our guests are going to be able to be here following the governor. So can we just...
So I think it sounds like maybe if the people who are doing the minority teacher report could wait, there's 10 minutes before the governor is supposed to be here, then we could have the full report after. We're just being sensitive to not wanting to start a report and finish a report. So the governor's going to be with us about an hour, so that would mean that we'd be looking at that report at about 3 o'clock. Does that work for the members?
Is that going to work for our guests?
Donald, I know you drove from Eastern Oregon.
But I have to get back tonight. That's the only
We think we would be able to get you on at 3 o'clock, and we've scheduled 30 minutes for this report, so we would get you out here by 3:30. Will that work for you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you for your flexibility.
In that case, I think we'll take a small recess for
Mary,
10 minutes.
Can I just interject? In the audience is Julie Huckenstein, our community college president. Since we're in her house, you might say thank you for housing us here today. But anyway, she's the interim president. She's really well thought of in Marion County, and Schmidt is one of the better community colleges, right? Because we're here. Today it is, right?
It's the best one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dick, and welcome, Julie. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your hospitality as well. Okay, let's take an 8-minute break, and we'll come back at 2 o'clock, probably when the governor gets here.
Okay, I guess we'll come back to order. I apologize for being a little late here. I understand that we've done the Middle 40 report, and we'll be coming back to the Oregon Minority Teacher report. So I would like to take maybe 10 minutes and kind of walk through my budget. I think everybody's probably seen it, and your view on it, I think, probably depends on where you stand. Not much has changed in 20 years. But I think this is a budget that will generate a lot of debate, but I think it's also a budget that's focused on the right things. And hopefully that debate, even among people who might disagree, will be productive in terms of trying to move outcomes for kids. First of all, I want to thank you for your engagement, for the OIB, for your engagement in helping me with some recommendations for prioritizing in the budget. As I said, it is a starting point for discussion. We're all going to be dealing with this for the next 6 months until the May forecast, probably till late June. And I tried to use this budget to frame the issues that I think are the most important to achieve our 40-40-20 objectives and to address really the issues of equity and opportunity in the state. Just to kind of give you a historic perspective, we've actually come a long way since 2010, in the last 4 years. So the first biennium, 2011 and 13, really we had a $3.5 billion budget shortfall. Every education budget was lower than it was before. On paper, the state school fund was up 6%, but we had lost $1 billion almost of stimulus money, so we were going in the wrong direction. But we were able to balance the state budget without ripping the state apart. We were able to make some structural changes. We created the OEIB. We brought the Department of Education into the executive branch. We redesigned our early learning system. We developed our achievement compacts. So we made a lot of progress in terms of trying to create the infrastructure for a seamless outcomes-based system of public education. In 13 and 15, we sort of fleshed this out. And we also got enough money in the budget to sort of stop, to sort of get a floor under us, if you will. I think we're now, and we created the independent governing boards for institutions, the HEC got up and running. So again, we made some significant progress. And I think, obviously, the major challenges going forward involve the budget, how we spend the money, how much we spend, and where we spend it. So I'm hoping that over this next 2 years, we can begin to change the state's role in education funding from a passive funder of enrollment to an active and strategic investor in outcomes. The recommended budget has education as really the centerpiece. It's 50% of the general fund dollars in the budget. It's a total investment of $9.4 billion. We have a positive revenue forecast projected out through the 21-23 biennium. And we've also realized some significant savings, some of it from the changes we made in the PRS system, some of it in public safety, but most of it in the healthcare transformation in Medicaid and in PEB. And we're hoping to extend that new care model to OEB as well. And the projected savings by the biennial savings by the 21-23 biennium are close to actually over $4 billion. So the point is there is an increasing delta inside the general fund that will allow us now to continue to increase our investments in public education, which is good news. The budget's organized around the 3 pathways with which you're very familiar: kindergarten readiness and 3rd grade reading, high school and post-secondary completion, and then connecting education to careers. So there's a couple of sort of high notes I want to strike. The first one I mentioned earlier, which has to do with outcomes. The thing that unifies the budget from early learning to post-secondary education is an effort to focus on outcomes. And I think meeting our 40-40-20 objectives and ensuring success for all of our students depends on being more strategic in our investments and trying to have them leverage the outcomes that we're actually trying to achieve. So along with increasing funding through the state school fund and through the community college and public university support funds, I've also included proposals to change basically the current funding formulas in favor of outcomes rather than enrollment. I know that higher ed is engaged in this. I know that there is a range of views about whether this is good or not, going from this is really, really bad to this is very exciting. But we are having a very productive conversation with higher ed and the HEC around these issues, and I really do appreciate the willingness to have at least have that conversation. I'm challenging the K-12 system to do the same. There are 3 formula changes in the proposed. One of them is around ELL. One of them is around career and technical education, and the 3rd one is around 9th grade on track. These will generate a healthy amount of controversy and already have. I simply want to say, though, that if we continue to put the children's potential at the center of our focus, I'm sure we can shift these system incentives in the right direction. So whenever you do something like this, there are winners and losers. But let me just try to put that into perspective. If you have an English ELL program, and look just within the ELL population, you will be a loser if you continue to keep those kids in the programs and not actually successfully complete them. If you successfully complete them, you will actually be a winner. Now that makes imminent sense to me. Now we know across all students there will be winners and losers because of those are reallocated dollars, but that happens every fall with enrollment changes. But most importantly, this is 1.7%. 1.7% of the state school fund. So I do believe that this is an important debate for us to have. And you know, this population is a population in which we have to move the dial disproportionately. It's the fastest growing segment of Oregon's population. And it's a population that is lagging behind in terms of their opportunity to achieve. So to me, this is an issue of equity. It's an issue of really meeting the goal of 40-40-20. And so I know that we'll have a robust conversation about that. Any budget has trade-offs, so notwithstanding the savings we have and notwithstanding the improving revenue forecast, it's still a zero-sum budget, which means that we're going to have to make a macro allocation decision about the money we spend on education versus the other parts of the budget, public safety, social support services, etc. And then we have to make a decision about how we allocate those dollars within the education budget. It came as no great surprise to me that all of the major stakeholders greeted my budget with lament that they didn't get enough money. That was true of higher education, K through 12, and community colleges. I'm not surprised, but I want to just say that as those particular stakeholder groups begin to advocate for their own silo, I think there's two things we need to keep in mind. One, if it's just about silos, we're defeating the very purpose for which we created this organization. This isn't, because the system is only as strong as its weakest link. So, secondly, the money has to come from somewhere. And I know this budget will look different when it emerges at the end of June than it does now. But the fact is that pulling more money into the education bucket out of other programs can jeopardize services that have a profound impact on the ability of students to learn. I have an article that I saw recently about the number of homeless children, school children, in the Beaverton School District, which increased from 695 last year to 841 this year. So the money we're spending on housing, for example, the money we're spending on social support services, the money we're spending on trying to keep families stable has a huge impact on the ability for kids to succeed. So this is not unlike how we've tried to change the paradigm in healthcare. If your objective is to deliver healthcare, it's basically about doctors and hospitals. If your objective is to make people healthy, it's not very much about doctors and hospitals and institutions, but it has a whole lot to do with housing and nutrition and stable families, etc. So I hope that we'll at least take that kind of a lens, at least in terms of going into the budget. So the major trade-offs were first trying to ensure that the budget reflects priorities beyond K through 12, which is very important, but also reflects our commitment to post-secondary education and the connection to work and early learning and preschool. Ensuring that we make investments to scale up the strategic initiatives that we've started that have been proven to help students move through those really critical transitions from pre-K to kindergarten and into first grade, keeping students on track to graduate in 9th grade, which we know is very directly connected to the number of high school credits they have when they enter the 9th grade, and of course the transition from high school to post-secondary education. And then ensuring that we invest in reinforcing the system change work that we've started, and particularly the collective impact work that we're doing at the community level in our early learning hubs, and our STEM hubs, and our regional achievement collaboratives. So in addition to ensuring that there has been a significant increase in the resources available to the various state school support funds, we've also recommended investments outside the funding formula, as I mentioned. We've got $37.4 million in educator and school leader support and collaboration, which I think we could all agree is a nexus of our interests. We've invested to empower educators to pursue transformational practices and curriculum alignment and instructional strategies. The other thing I want to really emphasize is equity and collective impact. This budget was really put together through an equity lens. And it's just really clear to me that if we want to achieve our educational objectives, but also really our commitment to equity and opportunity, that we have to break down those barriers that have for years been very corrosive to the opportunity of children to learn, and that is particularly true of students of color and children who are living in poverty. So this is an opportunity to, I think, walk our talk. So throughout the budget, you're going to see an emphasis on targeting populations that are in need, as well as encouraging partnerships between institutions and community-based organizations that have a proven track record of actually moving the dial with these students. As I mentioned earlier, it's my intent to set sort of a larger table, policy table, to include the traditional educational stakeholders, but also parents, teachers, communities, community-based organizations that reflect those students that traditionally have not had an equal opportunity to succeed in our current system, give power and voice to those people and bring them to the table, which is, I think, going to be absolutely essential if we hope to succeed. The budget does include $2.5 million to better integrate communities of color into our early learning hubs and our STEMs and our regional achievement compacts towards that larger goal. So let me just then touch really quickly on the three pathways. I would say the centerpiece of the education budget, which is the centerpiece of the state budget, is $440 million that is invested in basically creating a age 3 to grade 3 pathway. And it's that investment is based on a very simple proposition, and that is that if we invest at the earliest possible point in every child's learning and development, we will give them the best opportunity to succeed, and we will save huge amounts of money downstream in terms of remediation, in terms of dropout, in terms of the cost of the social support system and the public safety system. And we have a real analogy, and that's the healthcare system. There's a clear parallel between investing in prenatal care and investing in early childhood development and learning. And you get the biggest return on investment, and you can't see it in 2 years, which is why we never do it. And it's also why we developed a 10-year budget framework. But if we're serious about really making this work, we have got to make those early investments. And in the healthcare parallel, if the objective is just to provide medical care, then you spend a lot of money on institutions, in that case hospitals. If you want to create a healthy population, you spend money on prevention and wellness and the community-based management of various chronic conditions. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to have the discipline to invest on the front end for a sustained period of time. There's an old story, and I'm sure you've all heard it, about the fisherman in the woods who sees a baby float by and runs in and gets the baby, and another baby floats by, and this goes on for a while until his fishing partner runs upstream, and he says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "I'm going to go find the guy who's throwing the babies in the river." So unless we're willing to make and sustain this investment, we're just not going to make it over time. So it won't surprise you to know that this is a part of the education budget and actually part of the general fund budget that I am prepared to most vigorously defend in the budget process. So basically it's broken down into three lumps. One is full-day kindergarten, $220 million. One is $135 million in early learning, and then $85 million we're calling a literacy package. But the idea is if you just have full-day kindergarten and don't link it directly with 0 to 3 and preschool, and then you don't link kindergarten in a thoughtful manner with professional development and curriculum alignment up to grade 3, you have another place to park your kids, but you don't actually get the outcomes that you want. So the $135 million actually builds on the work that we've already done with our early learning hubs. It reinforces our efforts to better integrate various different funding streams, and it basically reflects a commitment that investing in early childhood is the area where we get the greatest return on investment, and that meeting our third grade reading objectives, and we believe we can get 90 to 95% of the kids in the state reading at level in third grade within 5 years. And just think about that for a minute, what that would mean for success, for getting rid of the achievement gap, and for opportunity. But we have to meet our outcomes around kindergarten readiness and also stable attached families, which is where the social support services and the wraparound services come in. We know that the demographics in our state and our nation are changing, and they're changing particularly fast with very, very young children. So that's the point where we can really get the greatest opportunity to ensure not only that we're investing in early learning, but also that we are inclusive of the diverse communities and community-based organizations that really have been left behind. Investments in higher education. The budget reflects your priorities that we had I think our last meeting about affordability and completion in higher education. We've expanded the opportunity grant in the area of affordability by 24% to $142 million. We have $500 million in the Community College Support Fund. That's a 7% increase over CSL. We have $626 million in the Public University Support Fund, which is a 14% increase. Last biennium, we focused on community colleges and had a 14% increase and a 7% increase in higher education. Is it enough? No. But I think that it reflects a serious commitment to try to redirect additional savings and growth from our economy, particularly in higher education, which has disproportionately taken cuts during the recession. In addition to the direct investments made into the higher ed support funds, we have $17 million invested in a 11 through 14 initiative that seeks to build a bridge between ninth grade and post-secondary education to ensure that students are both on track to graduate, but also were connected with a pathway to a meaningful career. We've also included in that an effort to replicate the Eastern Promise, and has been very, very successful in that regard. And then finally, pathways to connect education to careers. Obviously, in addition to making sure our young people have a well-rounded education, we need to connect them with real careers as a foundation for our economy, but also to reduce poverty and improve equity. And I'll give you one example, a very real example, a young boy named Derek, who is a Latino, born to a single mother. Family struggled financially for a long period of time, often had to sort of choose between rent and groceries, and this young man had thought of dropping out of high school in order to get a job and help support his parents. His school got a CTE revitalization grant. They developed a real premier welding program. He got introduced to the program. Through that, he got connected to a $25 an hour job. He was able to stay in school, use the money to help his family, and now his aspirations go beyond high school. He wants to go to Oregon State University and get a degree in engineering. And actually, breaks you up thinking about it. There are stories like that all over the state. And so this really is about people. Sometimes we reduce it to dollars on a piece of paper. I want to tell you just a quick aside. When I was Senate President in 1985, we had a hole in our Medicaid budget. And the emergency board went down to fix it. And one of the things we did is we put a little money into it from the emergency fund, and we changed income eligibility and dropped 3,500 people off the medically needy program. And I remember sitting there in a room like this, looking out at spring happening and saying, boy, that was easy. We took a couple of votes and wrote some numbers down, and suddenly we balanced the budget. And then I went home to Roseburg, where I was practicing emergency medicine. And 6 months later, I started to see some people in the ER who were impacted by that sterile budgetary decision. And one of them was a man who had had a massive stroke because he could no longer afford the blood pressure medication. So, as we go forward during this legislative session, I hope that we can move beyond numbers on a piece of paper and remember that behind those numbers are faces and people with hopes and dreams and aspirations, lives of our fellow Oregonians. I think that's really, really important. So we've got a big commitment to CTE, and here we've got the formula change that will give us long-term stable funding, and we've also got money to fund the CTE revitalization grants. We've also, and I guess that story of Derek is one example of how applied learning can actually pull children through high school instead of pushing them through, give them a real hope and a connection, something tangible. We've also got $15 million in STEM strategies and STEM hubs, and I believe that with that $15 million and then the total $24 million for CTE, the formula change and the general fund dollars, that we can both improve student outcomes, increase high school completion, increase the number of kids who are literate in math and science, and increase the number of kids who get connected with all the high-wage high opportunity, high need jobs that are out there today and get a lot more CTE and STEM certificates and degrees. So I will stop there. Again, I know that anytime you start cutting the hog, as we say down in Roseburg, people come out of the woodwork. But I'm hoping that we can have a different kind of discussion. I know that there's going to be disagreement on this board and in the legislature, but let's remember what we're trying to accomplish, and I'm confident that we'll find a way to get there. So with that, I'll just open it up for any conversation you want to have with everybody. Ron?
Thank you. Well done.
Well, so I take to have a motion just to embrace the budget here, or is
Well, yeah, here, I'll comment only because I've been some conversations the last couple of days with some people who weren't so supportive. And I think what we have to remember is there's an inside Salem job which you've got to do the next 6 months or so. But I know you keep in mind, I'm just saying it again, we've got to make sure that there's an outside Salem message about why these changes are important too. Because for instance, the changes to the formula, I think it's critical. I'd favor more changes to the formula, and I hope we evolve more changes eventually. But those are hard. I mean, everybody wants to give up anything that's coming their way. So I think we've got to all work together with you to build an understanding, not just in Salem, but statewide, that these changes and tying a budget to outcomes really is where we have to go.
Ben, and then Dick?
Governor, I just want to highlight, there's a higher education investment in your budget to the tune of about $100 million that wasn't really the subject of any discussion at the HEC or at the OEIB or really in the development of your budget because it was not a choice, and it was the increased debt service associated with projects that the state has supported over the past several biennia at community colleges and universities. When we look at sort of where the new dollars are going, that's a pretty significant increase in the state's funding of capital projects in higher education. Again, non-discretionary, these were previously obligated by the state. Now the bill comes due for debt. And I know for the HEC it was discussed a lot not because we had any option about whether or not to recommend paying the debt service, but because it puts real limitations on what's possible when you have a $100 million increase. That includes the OHSU bonds, in addition to community college and OUS related projects, but a significant new investment in higher education.
Yes, so Governor, I would just echo what Ron just said, and I think there's two things that came clear in what you were talking about. First of all, we're not talking about widgets here, we're talking about individual lives and those outcomes, but more importantly, what I'd like to focus on is not only the investment, but the costs of not doing. It touches everything in our lives. Every social ill that we can come up with can go back to the education process, which in turn turns to jobs and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's important that we weigh the costs if we don't do, and that's pretty significant. And then I'd be interesting maybe on a private conversation, if you were chair of the Investments and Outcomes Committee, what 12 months from now, let's have some good outcomes.
Well, obviously, I think the outcomes that we're likely to see the soonest are in two areas. One is obviously in the early childhood kindergarten readiness arena, and I think the other one is in the STEM CTE arena, where you can actually connect kids in real time to pathways to career.
Yeah, may I share just one? I carry this around with me, and you and I have talked about this. But Dick Alexander, he's a decade long of expanding early childhood programs, and Myers will say he changed tens of thousands of lives. But he always gave me that in the past we've always done it with this. This is a Band-Aid, and we're over that stage now, and I think he would actually be proud of it.
I just, applaud all the work. I just thinking, as I was listening to you recap this, I'm just thinking of the journey that this group has been on over the last several years to get to this place. And I think back where we were 4 years ago, we didn't even have in our vernacular things like 11 to 14. And we have come so far. And when I listen to you read those off, and read through, of course, the budget, what I hope doesn't get lost in the next several months of the session is we're talking about the right things for Oregonians. The numbers are going to be debated. We know that already, you've heard that. But the issues, the strategic investments that we're trying to address are the right ones. You can't argue with STEM, CTE, early learning, 11, 14. That it will move the dial. And what I hope going through the political process that we're all going to be engaged in pretty quickly is we don't lose sight on the validity of the investments when we start losing sight of the numbers and the conversation around.
Yeah, I hope so. Obviously, it's a resource allocation debate we're going to have, and I think having a context for that's really important beyond just a 2-year event horizon, but a 10-year sort of context for that. And then, I think formula changes are obviously controversial. I know Mary's expressed a list of reservations, many of which I think are well-founded. What I'm hoping is that we can have a conversation, right? Not just not go there. And I do have to say that higher ed is actually engaged in a conversation, and obviously they're very concerned about how it's done. It's easier to do it if you have more money, and just as we had a little bit more money to lube the gears when we did our healthcare transformation. So that needs to be borne in mind. But to just not have the conversation, I think, would be a mistake. As you said, Mark, I mean, we are talking about the right things, and I think as long as we agree on what the right things are and where we want to end up, then I think we've got some latitude to sort of sort through the challenges as we move to get there.
So I was just sitting here reflecting on your fisherman story and remembering that I heard you tell that story in the year 2000 when I started on the Quality Education Commission. And so now it will be the fall of 2015, and we're investing in not throwing the children in the river. And so it's interesting. I wrote down that point because I think it's something that I will definitely use, and we have to remember is that one of the conversations we always had in Quality Education Commission is about, so when will we see the outcomes? And I think it's important for us to keep saying, we're not going to see it in 2 years, we're not going to see it in 3 years. But if we don't do something now, another 15 years is going to go by, right? So that really helped me because I think one of the challenges being on this board and then being in the system where I also hear the stories about, so what's the impact if we really can't fund what we're already funding right now in order to do some of these priorities? And so I think the kind of both and place for us to keep track as OEIB, because we are supposed to be overseeing the whole system, is what else is going on in those other decisions that also impact what's happening with the floor or the base or what's currently happening in the schools. And I know we were recently just talking about one, and I'll be testifying at the state school board, so this isn't to hang out any particular group. But I'm often in conversations in my own community where it's, well, they're doing this and they're doing that, and it's the they. Now, because I understand that, are different people, are different organizations, but we're all part of the same big system. So I think one of the things that will be really important to us, and I keep thinking about the chart Hilda put together just on the accelerated learning and the career and college ready, just keeping track of all that work going on is going to be so important across all the agencies so that we can see what's impacting something else. So I'll just give an example. In my school district, the conversation is, okay, we're going to fund full-day kindergarten. There's a whole bunch we're going to have to do that's not necessarily going to be covered in that FTE allocation just for the kids in that classroom because it's one time and it's the first thing and all those kinds of things. And then our secondary folks are saying, but we're going to be the losers. Our kids are going to be the losers. So that must mean that the message is those are the throwaway kids. But that's not what we're saying, and if we don't make sure to balance the conversation with the other things and make sure that at our district level or any institution level where the decisions get made about how the money is spent, that we're not paying attention to those priorities. So I think that's the other part of the message is that it's not just that these investments are to do these things, it's that they're pointing to what we think are the highest leverage, and the way in which we go about them through an equity lens is going to be an important piece.
Yes, they point a direction. Yeah. Cool.
Sure. So I just wanted to appreciate and comment that I think that the creation of this budget, in particular the education budget, but many other aspects of the budget, has probably been the most inclusive budget process I've seen. I've now had the opportunity to hear from many folks that are part of the community who are invited to give input, perspective, and share their worldview on solutions. And I think that creates a totally different type of credibility and authenticity to this process. So I want to appreciate that. I also think the fact that this budget is so clear in the expression of evidence about the way that early childhood education and health are connected is really important to call out. And I actually think that outside of the education budget, there are many parts of the rest of the budget that actually deeply support these outcomes. For example, housing resources, a focus on mental health. I think all of those things are just very important to complement. And I also feel so proud that the state of Oregon is really taking this stand and saying that our success and our future is really embedded in the success of our low-income children and children of color. Children of color make up more than half of our 0 to 5-year-olds. They're 38% of our entire school-age population, including immigrant and refugee children. And I feel like we are finally walking our talk. And I want to appreciate and commend you, Governor, and your entire team and our OEIB staff. And you know, we discussed many things at this board, and I don't think I've ever received as many phone calls and expressions of appreciation about the way that this board is leading and really tying our decisions to outcomes for children. So thank you.
Governor, you know, I'm trying to think about the comment that Ron just made about getting your voice and your vision outside the Beltway. Because I think when you are representing what you've done here with the budget, your leadership with OEIB, it's very compelling. But it's a limited few people who get the experience that we have of working with you very closely and intimately on the board and in subcommittees and in the process. I think it's essential at this point in time that more of Oregon hear your voice and definitely share this compelling vision for the budget and for our future. But I don't have a recommendation on how to do that. But I think it's essential because I think once people hear that, you won't have any trouble whatsoever taking this budget through the process. It reminds me when I was head of child welfare, the way we got that budget through was that we went to every county and said, these are your children, we need your support. There's got to be a way to do that. And I really encourage all of us to think about how to do that because it's a compelling message.
Nancy?
A lot of us are thinking about what we first heard from you when you ran the first time and the hopes and dreams we all had. And another thing I remember you saying that was really impactful for me is the story you tell of the woman who can't afford an air conditioner, so she ends up having a stroke and impacting her life substantially at a much more costly rate. And I think of this budget is changing systems, and I don't want us to forget that, because when I think of kids reading at grade level at 3rd grade, what I know is how much less money you have to spend on remediation up along the pathway and how much savings there can be there for other things. And then, like the woman, there's also, most important to me, is the cost on a child's self-concept when they're not reading at grade level by 3rd grade is a lot. So I appreciate that we are trying to change the system. I know how hard it is, but without changing it, we're going to be spending more on remediation and less on prevention.
So as an OEIB member, I can't fault this budget. I think it funds the things that we have discussed, and it makes the kinds of investments that I think we do need to make if we're going to change the system. As a college president,
Right.
At $500 million, we'll be cutting, we'll be closing programs. 40-40-20 will become for us at Lane and other community colleges as well. It moves from an aspirational goal to an unattainable dream. And that's the reality piece that I can sit here at OEIB and and applaud this, and I do. I think these are really good decisions, thoughtful decisions, places that we need to invest. But there are going to be unintended consequences of this at local community colleges, not just at Lane. Other colleges have announced cuts that they're going to have to make at that level of funding. So I think we just need to be real about it is difficult to make these kinds of investments, but there will be other consequences that may stop us from serving the very students that we want to serve here, the most underrepresented, underprepared, first generation and poorest students that community colleges serve in the state. So I want to have these conversations, but I think we need to do it with a little bit of dose of reality of what's going to happen on the ground.
Anything else? Well, then I'm going to tell you a story. One last story, because then it sort of gets to Mary said, she's right. I mean, I don't dispute that at all, but this just came to me. But I think there are parallels here that are at least worth noting. So the e-board decision in 1980, actually it was 87, that resulted in these people, nameless, faceless people getting disenfranchised with the stroke of a pen. The next year, the legislature discontinued funding for organ transplants in the Medicaid program because it was an optional service. And it was a totally non-controversial, unreported decision, largely because there was nobody who needed to transplant around. The legislature made it. And in September, a little boy named Kobe Howard showed up. He was 7 years old. He had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He'd been in remission and had an exacerbation of his illness, and his pediatrician recommended marrow transplant is really the only option. So he applied, his family applied, they were on Medicaid, but he was denied because we didn't cover it anymore. So his family started this fundraising, very public fundraising campaign. It was just heart-wrenching, and it went on through the fall, and he eventually died, I think, on December 3rd at Emmanuel in Portland. Had only raised half the money he needed for a transplant of Hutch in Seattle, but he wasn't in remission, didn't have a match, so it probably didn't matter at the end of the day. But it was a terrible human tragedy, and it was also this sensational human interest story, and the media that had ignored the original decision descended upon Oregon. Al Gore showed up. It was pretty amazing. And so the e-board made a recommendation next year to partially refund the transplant program for 8 people who were in immediate need, who had applied, and I actually opposed the motion. It was actually my first foray into health policy after having been in the legislature for 87 years. And to me, it wasn't really about transplants. The question wasn't about whether transplants had merit to do. It wasn't whether we had the $250,000 to buy the 8 transplants. To me, the question was, if you're going to spend more money on health care, where should the next dollar go? And what was the rationale to buy transplants for a few people who were covered with Medicaid when you had a pretty good benefit, when you had tens of thousands of people who didn't have any coverage whatsoever? And what was the rationale to buy 8 transplants as opposed to 8 or 18? And it was real clear that there was no rationale whatsoever. It was being driven by emotion, and we had no way of knowing whether spending $250,000 to give 8 people transplants was going to have a bigger health impact for the state than taking $250,000 and buying 10,000 women access to prenatal care. So, the motion failed, and what happened was we treated the Oregon Health Plan, which was really an effort to prioritize dollars that we're going to spend on health care based on the outcomes long term, right? But what it didn't do is it didn't really look at the underlying healthcare system itself. So fast forward to 2011, what we actually did finally is, it's not just about the allocation of public dollars, it's how you spend them and the system incentives. And so we have fundamentally transformed the healthcare system, right? And so I guess my point is, Mary's right. There's no way you're not going to have those kinds of choices somewhere in the system. I mean, we're not going to get another $1 billion this month. So there are those decisions have to be made. So to me, the question is, how do you get the greatest value for the greatest number of Oregonians? To me, that's the fundamental resource allocation question. And then the second question is, how do you transform the system? And so with the Oregon Health Plan, we've been working on that for 25 years, and we made more progress in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 2 decades. So you reach a tipping point. So if we are willing to at least continue to have these conversations and to acknowledge, as Mary says, that there are consequences for every budget choice you make. Every dollar you spend on one set of services are dollars you're not going to spend on another set of services. And if we're willing to continue to engage in that conversation, my prediction is that it's been 15 years, but we're going to have a sort of exponential uptick within a few years if we can continue to at least keep these issues on the table and alive. So I appreciate you indulging my storytelling today, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thank you very much.
Governor,
Yeah.
the moral of the story, it seems to me, is not just that there are tough choices about who gets the money. It's that you go a lot farther if you get smarter about how you spend it.
Yep.
And I hope that part doesn't get lost in this money. It's not just moving things from A to B. It's sometimes getting a lot more value how you spend it.
Okay, let's.
And Governor,
yes,
I was
please.
trying to see if I could get on this.
Oh, please, yeah. Hey, Hannah. Welcome. Was that Julia?
Hannah.
That's Hannah.
No.
Yeah. So, Governor, I want to just say that there's been a lot of work that's gone into the budget, and there's a lot of work, I believe, still to be done. But one of the things that I just want to point out is that there are stakeholders across the state, and they're referenced many times. I just want to point out, as a member of the OEIB and as president of one of those stakeholder groups, those stakeholders are the 42,000 educators that work with students every day. The administrators that are represented by COSA are the administrators that are in our buildings every day. And to ensure that we're actually reaching out to them as we're building these proposals and asking them, on formula changes, what would really work for students, I think would be a wise way to start the process and make sure that we're engaged in things that really will address the needs of our students, and also listening to parents. Parents have been clear around what they want, a well-rounded education and class size that meets the needs of their own child. So I appreciate the conversation, but didn't want to let it go unnoted that those stakeholder groups work hard every day, as well as our school board members who've been elected to represent each one of the districts. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I sort of hope that no one assumed that I was taking them for granted. I mean, they are obviously key partners and key players. They have been and will be, and we'll go out of our way to make sure that they're a part of the conversation, and look forward to the debate. Anyone else on the phone? Okay, then let's move to the Minority Teacher Education Act status report. Who's doing that? Okay.
When you're coming up, I do want to acknowledge Donald and the fact that you came from Eastern Oregon in order to be part of the report. I know you've chaired the committee. I know this is an area of great concern and passion for you. I want to thank the whole committee, but we thought we could get you on the phone, and you said, no, I want to be here, so I appreciate that.
Still have some Christmas shopping to do. So.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Hilda Rosselli, and I am joined today by two wonderful colleagues that I have the opportunity to work with on a pretty regular basis.
I'm Donald Easton Brooks. I'm the Dean of the Colleges of Business and Education at Eastern Oregon University, and I'm actually the chair of the Oregon Education Equity Advisory Group.
And
Markeisha Smith, and I serve as the director of the Oregon Department of Education Equity Unit.
Welcome.
so we're here today because, first of all, there was a status report that was requested by Senate Bill 755 that was completed in July of 2014. This might look familiar to you, and I think you have an executive summary. But in talking with Nancy and OEIB staff, we really wanted to not only give you an update on where we are in terms of addressing the goals that were set out by the Minority Teacher Act, but to give you a sense of what we've learned along the way and where our recommendations are pointing to, and also to give you a sense of what some of the initial investments were that were made during this biennium that were aimed at changing some of the demographics of our education workforce, and more excitedly, to give you a sense of a very energized group that meets on a monthly basis that takes this report not just as a report, but as an action call for continued advocacy and concern and opportunities for improvement. I'm going to start first and just give you a sense of some statistics that came out of the report and help you understand where we are in terms of our progress towards meeting the 2015 goal of July 1st of this coming year. There were 3 goals set out in the Minority Teacher Act. One was that we would increase the number of minority teachers that were employed by 10% over the 2012 number. And again, likewise, to increase the percentage of administrators of color 10% over the 2012 baseline data, and to increase the number of students enrolled in completing teacher education programs, students of color in those programs, by 10% over the 2012. So we looked at that very carefully. The committee helped analyze the data and to come back with our status report, and you do have an infographic that kind of summarizes our progress. One might say, well, my goodness, we're making some progress. We are seeing that we have met the goal for the number of educators in the pipeline and the education prep programs that were mapped out. And we've met the goal for administrators. At least seems like we're on track for administrators. But you can see that we've seen a decrease in the number of employed teachers. And in fact, some of those teachers became administrators. So when they move from one category to another, it can be a good thing on one side, but we've seen a loss on some other areas. With that, I think one of the recommendations that the committee that Donald chairs right now is grappling with is whether or not we need to readjust the goals of the Minority Teacher Act. We already have had great conversations about changing the name of the report, and I believe Vicki Chamberlain has a legislative concept filed to go ahead and do that. We think, first of all, it applies to more than teachers, and in many places, it's not a minority that we're talking about. So we have a better name that we're recommending. But we're also looking at and grappling with a decision about what would be an appropriate goal, rather than just changing the number for 2017. It's bumping it up again, 10% over, I don't know, 2012 or over 2015. We really felt like that's never going to quite catch up with the changing demographics of our K-12 population. And so right now, we're welcome to your thoughts about this. We're suggesting a language that might look at setting a high goal and just saying, this is the demographics of our K-12 population, and this is where we have to aim to go to for our employed educators and for our teachers in the pipeline. So we will keep you posted on that. We welcome your questions and concerns. And now I'd like to turn it over to Markeisha, who will give you a summary of the investments that were made from House Bill 3233 and the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning.
Okay, thank you, Hilda. So part of my responsibility in all of this work, in addition to serving on the committee with Donald and Hilda, is to manage the strategic investments that were a part of what we're talking about here. And so in the longer report, there is a really good summary of each of the projects and what their objectives are, but just some highlights, and I've got a slide deck that came around to you just a moment ago. But there were 4 projects that were funded through the Oregon Minority Educator Pipeline Model Grant. And in short, all of those programs had to really think about how they were increasing the pipeline through efforts at the K-12 level, thinking about how that translated to what happens once students make the decision to become educators and actually apply to teacher education programs, and then the supports that need to happen there. And so out of those particular projects, we were able to fund 4, and you'll see that they come from Eastern Oregon University, High Desert ESD, Klamath County, and Salem-Keizer. The one thing that I will highlight about each of these that I think really is key is that they thought very carefully about what's happening, particularly with middle school and high school students, and getting them interested in the career of teaching. And so specifically, Salem-Keizer and High Desert are really looking at the teacher cadet model out of South Carolina I'm following very closely with that program and thinking about how to scale up with that. And there's some other slides here that really illustrate what's happening with those programs, particularly in Salem-Kaiser. And then with Eastern Oregon, what I think is really great is that they're thinking about how to leverage funds. So they were awarded this grant and also awarded the Culturally Responsive Pedagogies and Practices grant. And so thinking about how those two grants overlap, and so it's been really wonderful to see the opportunities that the students are able to take advantage of there in the high school programs. They've had the opportunity to hear Dr. Geneva Gay, who is, an expert in the field of culturally responsive teaching, speak to them and sort of talk to them about, how that really ties into their careers as educators. And we just thought that that was, a wonderful demonstration of how this can all come together. And then Klamath is really looking at particularly what's happening with American Indian Alaska Native students and really the need there in terms of teachers, and thinking about, again, a program that is somewhat like what a teacher cadet program would be, and garnering that interest at high school for students to consider teaching as a career. So my next slide, I think I can use this, right?
The top one. It takes a look.
Okay, all right. Let me get my control here.
There we go.
All right, so the second grant opportunity that came out of this strategic investment was the Oregon Minority Educator Retention Grants. And we were able to fund 3 grants in this area, and those went to Hillsborough School District, Pendleton, and Portland Public Schools. The really wonderful thing about each of these particular grants is they're really looking at hiring practices and what happens when they have candidates of color, candidates who are bilingual, multilingual come in, what happens in the interviewing process, how are they contacted to even, get an interview, what all of that looks like. The other really, I think, wonderful thing is they're also not just thinking about retention, but also recruitment. And so they're using some of those dollars to also really, have some campaigns around, particularly in Pendleton, how they can, given the demographics of that area, really attract teachers to the area, and particularly teachers of color, working with the tribes there to make that happen. Hillsborough is doing a lot of work with some of their students, and similar to the cadet programs, really thinking about how to get students interested in teaching as a career. And then I think really the interesting thing about Portland Public is they're really doing some surveying and thinking about teachers who are both currently teaching in Portland Public and who have left, and really sort of trying to get an idea of what's making them stay, what's really making all this come together, so teachers of color and teachers who are bilingual really feel like they're in a welcome environment and want to be there, and using community supports to do that as well. So those are just the big highlights of what's happening with the grants. I wanted to show a few pictures here, and so this is from our Eastern Oregon University grant. And you'll see here at the top there you have a couple of students that are working in elementary schools and doing some reading and being able to observe teachers and what's happening, really getting a clear sense of what the profession looks like and the sorts of things that they might be able to do, and having some great fun with that. In the left-hand corner there, Dr. Brooks was able to host some of the students a few months ago here from Milton Freewater, and just really coming to the campus and seeing what all that looks like. The really interesting thing about what they're doing there is they're offering credit. So students that are taking that class at the high school level are getting what would be equivalent to an Ed 101 credit and being able to use that. And so that's a wonderful way to really get that interest, right, in teaching as a career, and Eastern Oregon as an option to pursue that. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, just saying, in the right-hand corner there, that was the classroom. I actually had the opportunity to visit the Milton Freewater High School. Went way out there, was a little bit nervous about that, but we made it. It was a wonderful visit. And the students were really excited about what was going on, and that was the day before they actually were going to hear Dr. Geneva Gay speak. So pictures from that. Can we play this? So this is a really cool little clip from some students here in Salem that are part of the PRO team, which is the middle school rendition of the teacher cadet program. And so they're speaking here with some little hand gestures about what PRO team is to them. So.
Protein helps you. Protein helps you find yourself in
Just a really cool clip. And the wonderful thing about this is even if they, decide somewhere down the line, right, that they don't want to become educators, they're really learning about themselves as students, about people, about how to interact with one another. And so there's a lot of other skills that are being built based on the models here. So just a little fun clip. And then the last program I wanted to highlight here is out of Hillsborough. And so Hillsborough is, really looking at how they can improve the pipeline of their bilingual students who are interested in teacher education. And so I want to make sure that I get the acronym right for what IGNITE stands for, and I've got it on one of my mini sheets here. It stands for Increasing Growth Now in Teacher Education, right? So there's some professional development that's happening with the teachers there. Students are getting to go out and observe, mentoring, so all of that. And again, they had a retention grant, right? But they're really looking at what the recruitment piece of this is about as well. And so we're really quite proud of that. So that's the end of kind of my summary of what's happening with the strategic investments and emphasizing some of the promising practices that we're seeing. The last point I want to make is just around what we're doing in collaboration with teacher prep programs and how this all sort of ties together. And so this summer we were, through strategic investments, able to host the Quality Teaching and Learning Institute at Oregon State University, which brought teams of teacher educator groups to Oregon State to really look at Common Core and next generation standards and sort of have some interactions there for about 4 days. And so one of the things that came out of that is we realized we needed to sort of back up and really have the emphasis be around culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy practice. And so I'm proud to say that in the planning with Hilda and some other members that we have really retooled that to be an opportunity for teacher educator teams to come to a series of events that's taking place next year, starting in February. That's participating in the PLT conferences, which are happening, the Professional Learning Team conferences. They'll have the opportunity to go to the English Learner Alliance conference. They'll have the opportunity, which I think is awesome, to interact with Dr. Geneva Gay for 2 days at an event taking place in Portland. They'll be a part of ORATE, which is the Oregon Association for Teacher Educators. Thank you. They'll be able to, hear presentations there, and then a final sort of culminating event at the end of May that will pull all this together. So, a lot of them have been really involved in the conversations around recruitment and retention around being culturally responsive, because that's what what we need and what we desire. So, thank you.
So Marquisha's giving you a sense of the...
Ron asked a question.
Yeah. I'm confused. So these 4 you start with, Eastern Oregon University, High Desert, Clamp. What's the actual money spent on? What are the dollars spent on? What are the uses of the funds?
So uses of the funds have been around professional development for teachers. In just thinking about how to recruit, retain, how to better interact with the students that they have in the classrooms, particularly students of color and English
so
learners.
The money is going to minority teachers?
Not just minority teachers for some of the projects, just across the board. But there is...
So explain to me why that's a good use of the money.
Well, go ahead, Donald. And Donald can speak specifically to his project.
And yes, exactly. And I think that's a good question. And one of the things that we thought about as a university is that we wanted to develop a model that's sustainable, a model that we could use without continuing to ask for funding. I would say probably 90 to 95% of our funding goes to either professional development or it goes to students as far as scholarships and getting them prepared. Now, the issue that we see, not just in Eastern Oregon, but I think in Oregon as a whole, in Oregon we have probably 85 to 90% of our teachers are white, might even be higher than that. And we have a low number of ethnically diverse or linguistically diverse teachers. The concern we have is that we need to increase the number of diverse teachers and at the same time help those teachers who are not ethnically and linguistically diverse become more culturally responsive. So that funding is really around how do we do both of those? How do we help those teachers that are already in the classroom become more culturally responsive, and at the same time, how do we bring more on? Let me give you an example of something that has happened. Milton Free Water's group of about 22 students. what they did is that they have been engaged in research around culturally responsive practice, how education has an impact on diverse populations of students. And what they did is they went back, after they met with Dr. Gay in a professional development kind of exercise, they actually went back to their school and had a conversation with their teachers about becoming more culturally responsive in their teaching, and really engaged in how do we come together as a community and really work as a community to become more culturally responsive as we move forward.
So let me just, is this report that was required to make, I completely understand the goal and I completely support the goal. My question is, how much thought has been given to whether this is the most effective way to spend the money towards accomplishing the goal?
Sure. Well, I'm sorry. The thing as well is that I can speak from my personal experience with this. Over the last 10 years, my research has been on the impact of education, educational practice, and educational policy on the effective practice on diverse teachers. on diverse students. And how do we close the gap, and at the same time, how do we educate our diverse population? There are a number of models out there, but one thing that we know for sure is that the more we diversify our field, the better our diverse students are going to be. So looking at models of what research has shown us that does that is what we're looking at. For instance, some of the research that I've done shows that over time, if we look at longitudinal, those students that are in classrooms that are more diverse actually do significantly better than those diverse students who are not in a diverse classroom. So we're able to develop models that give students a more diverse experience based on research. We're going to find that those gaps are going to close.
Okay, now I'll stop. I understand that part. To me, the question is, if our goal is to get more diverse teachers in the schoolroom, is this the best way to be doing it? I mean,
Sure.
Because I understand all the rest you're saying, I agree with all the rest you're saying, but we're not making the progress we're supposed to make getting more diverse enough teachers in the classroom. And are there other ways that we should we be using the money to give incentives to minority teachers to
Well,
come?
I would disagree. That would not make an effort. I would say
I'm not saying
that
not make an effort, I'm asking is the most effective.
I think that when you think about effectiveness, there are different ways to be effective, and I don't think anyone has the magic pill on the most effective. If so, everyone would be doing it, and everyone would be effective in it. I think we have to think of models that are culturally responsive to our state, and those models that really work with our state. And what we find in our state is that we haven't done a good job of growing our diverse teacher population and keeping our diverse teachers in our schools. So I do agree that what we're trying to do here by building our own and by retaining our teachers is very critical and important. The models that we have, I think we have various models, and I think the data is going to show, as we get this data, how effective this is. When I see 22 students in Milton Freewater that are wanting to look at education as an opportunity, I would say yes, it is effective. When I look at 22 students from Umatilla, when I look at 22 students from Pendleton, I would say yes, this model is effective. However, what I think is that, but in addition to this, what I think is happening and what's going on in these different grants is that we're not saying Eastern Oregon, you're out doing it by yourself, or Milton Freewater or Hillsborough, you're out doing it by yourself, that we're looking at all the resources we can bring together to do this. An example of this is when I think about Eastern Promise and some of the work that's happening in the Intermountain ESD with Mark Mulvihill. That Success 101 class is really a gateway to thinking about how you keep that motivation going and thinking about the type of program we have in Eastern Oregon to say, okay, now that we've identified those who are interested in education as an opportunity, how do we move that forward and keep that motivation going? And when you see those diverse students coming to EOU and they're talking about the impacts of them on their communities, and to think about when they go out and they read to those young children in the elementary school, they see an impact on their community and see an impact on how they can enhance their community. I would say right now it is an effective model because we're doing something that we've never done before.
Can I just make a comment about some of the other ideas that you mentioned? For years in the state, we've been working on this goal, and in 2 different districts that I've been in, we've actually been successful in recruiting people, and sometimes you can use bonuses, or sometimes you can just talk them into come into your district because it's a great thing to do. But it's really hard to get people to stay when you don't work on those other aspects of culturally responsive practices. And I love the point you made about in Oregon, because we're dealing with this right now in my district. Sometimes it's not even being about culturally different or linguistically different. It's about even where you come from and how the work of school business is done differently in a different place. That's a different culture. And sometimes that's even a more difficult barrier in Oregon. So we have, I think there's multiple districts in Oregon that have been successful recruiting, and many of us remember the times when we were flying to Texas and New Mexico and Florida and recruiting all these people, but they don't stay because we haven't had the supports and a culturally responsive community that makes people feel included and a part of the community and like they want to stay and be there. When you come and you feel like you're still an outsider, you don't prevail for very long. And so, I know it's hard because we never have the silver bullet that's going to work everywhere. But what I really like about this is that we're being very strategic. We're being explicit about deciding what we want the outcomes to be as well as how we're going to get there. We're collecting that information and we can point to the students that that's happening for. And now we're positioned that we can actually do the research on those groups of kids,
Sure,
right?
Exactly. And Ron, I would say two things to your point. I would say the first point, the question you're asking, we need to continue to ask that. Is this effective? Why is this effective? What's making this effective? I think we have to continue to do that until we see evidence that it is effective. And the second thing I would say, I hope that 3 years from now when you ask that question, we have data to show that this is why this is effective. So I think, your point is something that we have to continue to do. We can't just say, let's put things together and hope that it's dead. But how effective is this? What evidence is showing us that? And I think that's a good point. It also kind of leads to my portion of the presentation. Are we ready for this?
I just would like to add two things that not out of these dollars per se, but we are also doing a study of over 1,000 licensed teachers of color who have kept their license current in Oregon. And we're really trying to discern what are the reasons and what are the barriers that they may have faced. Some of them we know maybe in this room, we maintained our license, we're doing something else. We may have some that go across the state line to teach, but we believe that there are some important lessons that we can learn from those individuals who chose to become teachers and for whatever reason are not working in Oregon right now. We are also putting together a website, a state website, because what we've learned is there are teach dollars that are going, they're not even being used because people aren't pointing candidates to those federal dollars that could help them with the financial costs that are necessary to complete the program. So those are two other pieces.
I might add too, and I think Donald alluded to this a little bit, that I see this project in EOU dovetailing exactly with the Eastern Promise. We're creating vehicles for kids. And what we have found is, here's a strategic initiative here, here's a strategic initiative, they overlap. And you can use the vehicles to get to the families, to give them exposure and opportunity and hope. Then the incentives come in from other angles. And we're seeing kids now motivated to go into teaching, and now they have a pathway to do that, starting in middle school on through.
And even that, when we talk about the financial part of this, with the grant that we have, we're talking about $45 a credit for those who are interested in becoming teachers and really providing an opportunity for those students to be successful financially and make it through. So, and I think, as I think about, as we're talking about just this overlap and what we're doing, as part of the Oregon Education Equity Group, it really is about these same things. Let me apologize first. I came from Eastern Oregon and I was in the mountains. My ears haven't quite popped yet, or whatever you want to call it. So I don't know if I'm talking loud, if I'm talking low.
You're doing good.
I feel like I'm straight.
We'll let you know when they pop.
What's that?
We'll let you know when they pop.
All right. And so with the group, it really is about action. We really have a group of people that are involved, and one of the first conversations were about, if this is not about action, don't waste my time, which was a good conversation to have. And so we have people that are really committed across the state about how do we diversify teacher education in a way that we're able to move our culture, our state forward. As the governor mentioned, there is a demographic change in the state. And as we look at that demographic change, out of all the western states, Eastern Oregon is being is having a greater, well, there are a higher percentage of diverse populations coming to Oregon than other western states. So we're seeing a change in our demographic, and putting these things together, these preventative things together to make sure that we're ready for that is important, and it's critically important. And at the same time, how do we address our students that are already in the system? They're already going through teacher education. So in this group, we came together with a charge, and the charge of the group is that we're able to access, we're able to evaluate, and we're able to advocate in a statewide educational environment to provide recruitment, retention for culturally and linguistically diverse educators. And as we talk about educators, it's not just the teachers in the classroom, but also the administrators. Nicole, you talked about those counselors, and making sure that those counselors understand the culturally responsive way in which to do work with students, and at the same time, how do we get more diverse students to look at that as well? So as those students that come to Eastern Oregon and talk about education, we have that conversation about what that looks like and what goes on with making sure that we're looking at all aspects of education. So our group, as we talk about things, we're really diving into what does this look like for us and where should we go from here? What happens as we move forward? And one of the big things that we talked about is developing an equity scorecard. When we're developing the scorecard, it's about looking at the data. And what is the data telling us about how successful, how effective we are? And at the same time, where are our limitations? And where do we need to improve? And some of the things that we look at with the scorecard is workplace diversity. So how diverse is our population as a whole as it relates to different districts, as it relates to different areas of the state, and as it relates to the state as a whole? And if those things are happening, either because we do have a number of diverse populations, educators that are not in the schools or are in the schools, what's happening with that data? As Hilda mentioned, this survey is really going to give us a lot of data on what's happening. Why are teachers not staying in education or involved in education? I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. As we think about the group that is involved in this, we're talking about people we have legislators on the committee, we have community activists on the committee, we have Vicki, who's part of TSBC, and Keith is part of TSBC that's on the committee. We have Hilda, we have a wide range of people from different areas on the committee. One of the things we know is that educators account for about 8%, let me back up. Teachers account for about 8% of the change in student scores over time. That means about 92% of the change in scores happens somewhere outside of the classroom. So for us to really understand how to move our communities forward, we need to get those agencies outside of the classroom to be a part of the conversation, so we make sure that we are really engaging every part of our community. There are things that happen in community agencies that really can impact the success of students in the classroom. Different organizations, different policy groups that really can impact what happens with students inside the classroom. So having those different entities at the table is really critical in doing this work. People that are really about active participation doing this work. So back to the scorecard. So we're looking at diversity and leadership, and how committed are the leaders and diversity as well? Are they engaged in diverse actions that really are about moving their schools forward? Are they engaged in community activities that really about promoting diversity in their own school districts? The workplace climate. How is the workplace climate for those who are diverse? Both Marquisha and I have worked as school teachers and could really talk about how sometimes that workplace climate can be challenging for ethnically diverse and linguistically diverse teachers, really trying to look at how do we help move our systems forward. Community partnerships, how well are we engaging in our community partnerships, working with different agencies, working with our families and our communities. The structure of diversity, the roles that people play, the different roles that people play in our schools. What does that look like? Achievement scores. That's very critical and important. What do the achievement scores look like? And is there correlations between the achievement scores that we see and the amount of diversity that happens within the school based on some of these factors that we're looking at? And diversifying the field as a whole, not just recruiting, but retention. How well are we doing as a state? How well are we doing in our different districts? And how well are we doing in higher education systems as well? So,
So as you can see, the advisory group is really more than an advisory group. They are an action group, and they're very committed to making sure that the report is not just a report that sits somewhere and we check it off that it was done, but that there is consistent revisiting this, looking at what needs to happen next. And I think one of the other things is there are other pieces of investments this biennium that are also impacting this work. So Teach Oregon, which the state helped fund 2 of their 5 projects, are also paralleling some of the activities around cadet programs and future plans where, you know, if a person becomes a teacher, they promise them a position and they help fund their costs for that preparation program. So what we would intend to do is to, first of all, invite your feedback around the goal as we suggested. If we think that's a good recommendation, we'll pass that along to our legislators as they relook at the bill and update it for the next biennium. And we also would like to be able to come back in after July when the final report will be submitted. We are anticipating that there will be some more elements that this report did not include. So that kind of gives you.
Hey,
That must also be the cue.
yeah, so could the folks
to
on
end
the
this.
line mute? We just got a serious yawn, and we don't want to make sure and reflect the stimulating presentation here.
So we thank you very much and welcome any other additional questions or comments.
So this is a great starting place, and I really appreciate his hard work, and I also really appreciate the acknowledgement and calling out of the important role that other organizations play in outcomes. However, for this to really change, I can't help but wonder where is the role of our school administrators and our Oregon School Board Association. Where is the statement of support and deep commitment to increasing the diversity of our teachers from the Oregon Education Association? It's wonderful to create a pipeline and create qualified folks. We know that we've done that in other instances, and that's sort of one leg of the 3 legs that we'll need to have a truly reflective workforce and better outcomes for our young people. And so I feel like you're doing great work, but it's in one portion of it. And if we don't have school boards that hold our school superintendents and administrators accountable for doing equitable, fair, and quality hiring, we are not going to be in a different position. And if we don't have a labor union that works in deep partnership to be very clear about our desire to have a diverse workforce, we are not going to have the outcome. So I'm just curious about what work has been done on that front to build those partnerships.
We do have representation from the associations. We do not have OSBA at this point. So that one I will duly note and make sure. We did just present at their annual conference, but I think we can do more on that. And I would also add that Nancy has convened some of us within the staff at OEIB, and our next immediate action is that we will also be engaging specifically with communities of color to begin to say, this is where we are now, but what are we not hearing, what are we not paying attention to yet? What else do we need to focus on? And so both Shadeen Garcia and Serena Stoudemire-Wesley will be helping to coordinate that. We'll be engaging some members of the Educator Equity Advisory Group. So that will be another way that we can bring that voice in. We do have representation from COSA and OEA. Where I think we can do more is to actually say to them, what part are you willing to play? What's the commitment that you are willing to play? We know it's happening on an individual school district basis, but I don't think we yet have that at the association level. So that's where your advice is going to send us next.
That OSBA is a good starting point.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment that Mark, responding to Don's comments, that he used the word vehicles twice.
Well, it's because I have this Dick with Nell business card.
Oh, I see, that's good.
I just have a
Yes,
comment.
Kate.
I think it would also be very helpful is if you could be as explicit and descriptive as possible in terms of what culturally responsive means, or what culturally competent means. I think that there are some of us who understand clearly what is being communicated, but there are others that might go over their heads. And so I think if there's a description in terms of what that looks like, what's the profile of a culturally competent teacher. Also, this will allow what you're doing to be replicated across the state. If you can be as explicit and as descriptive as possible in terms of what that looks like, what's required, and what's the resource investment to get there.
Can I say something about that really quick?
Sure.
And I think that's a very critical point. When you think about, I'm going to get academic here, sorry. When you think about those two terms, culturally responsive and culturally competent, a lot of the critical theorists in culturally responsive practice will talk about being responsive, that it's about the responding to the diversity that happens. The word competent suggests something that's difficult to obtain. For me as an African American, that suggests that I can understand about 85% of what happens in the African American culture. Being from Texas, living in Colorado, now being in Oregon, it's a different notion of what's competent about the African American community here than in those other places I live. And it's very challenging for me to understand the 17 different types of African American culture that exists in the United States. So to ask someone that's not African American to be competent is really to ask them to do something that's very challenging. We would want people within their culture, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnic, whether it's linguistic, to really understand and be as competent as they can about their own whatevers. But to ask someone from outside in to be competent, I think is a very challenging thing. But what we want them to do is to be very responsive to what that means and what that's about, and be able to respect what goes on with that. The only analogy I could bring with this is being married to a female for 18 years. I'm yet to be competent about what's expected of me in response to her.
Right, 52 years.
And so I can accept that, but what's important is that I'm responsive and that I'm respectful to her as a woman, as a human, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you're right, and that's the message we really have to come to some operational understanding of what we're really trying to do and what we really should be doing, and not put stress on people to think that they have to be competent, because it's very difficult to do.
Or be descriptive, because those terms are used, whether or not people understand what they mean, they are used, and people interpret and apply.
Sure.
Because sometimes they think, we've made it all too challenging. What we really want are teachers who care about the students, who instill in them the belief that they can accomplish in the classroom and that they can aspire to be whatever they want. And I think a teacher's role is critical, regardless of who the student is. So that's why I'm saying describe those terms so that somebody doesn't say, I can't be, and consequently, I don't do. But if they understand what you just said, is that there's knowledge that's required, there's responsiveness that's required, and where you can be, competency is required, and what that looks like.
I just wanted to make one suggestion to add to that, and that's another partner, and that's Oregon Leadership Network. I know that we've had those conversations about exactly what you're talking about, and possibly developing some kind of reflection tool for teachers to say, so if I'm on this journey, what does it look like, and what are some of the practices that I'm trying to achieve that I could look at and say, I might be getting there on some of them. So I don't know if it's some kind of rubric. We've kind of gone round and round about that. I don't know if anyone specifically started on that work, but I do think we should be doing it together.
Rob Larson is a member of the group and regularly is engaged in thinking about how we can tie the work of OLN together.
And I just want to add to the comment about how we're defining cultural responsiveness. And so when we think about that from our equity team perspective, it's really about how we are looking at the differences, the uniqueness, the wonderfulness that is what all our students bring to a classroom as an asset rather than a deficit. And so for us, it's really about taking those experiences, taking that diverse background and using it to really deliver instruction in a way that's going to move the dial for students. And sometimes that looks very different And people struggle with that because we, often get caught up in, the difference between equality and equity. And so we have to have even conversations about that. And so I just wanted to add that as kind of a piece to how we communicate that as an equity unit. And so, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Dr. Smith, Dr. Roselli, Dr. Easton-Brooks. Thank you very much for the work and for the presentation today. Appreciate it.
And feel free to come out and see us in Eastern Oregon. That's about an hour past Middleton.
I invite them all the time and they just haven't.
Okay, it's now time for public comment. I'd like to remind people that they will have 3 minutes each to present. And I'd ask that each speaker state their name and affiliation for the record. And the first speaker is Sonia Moody Hurado. Is Sonia here?
Sometimes I think they're signing in. I don't know.
So the second one then is Ana Lidia Palazzo Angulo. And Seth will be our timekeeper. Where are you going to sit so I can see? Last time I went out.
Greetings, everyone. This has been really interesting, and I was very interested in this minority teacher report. So I just had a few comments that I wanted to state. First of all, I would like a few more statistics, which I know that the committee can get, but I know that there's a percentage of teachers, of all teachers, who stop teaching on a regular basis and go on to other things in their life. So I'm wondering what the disparity is between teachers that stop teaching overall and the number of minority teachers who stop teaching. So I want to know if there's a disparity there. And then, of course, the question about why is much more important if you are looking at a disparity than if you're just saying, well, all teachers have a big, they have a percentage of teachers who stop teaching. So when you ask somebody why, well, they have another career they want to do. But if you've got a disparity, you've got a place to ask why, because there's a reason for the disparity, which could be something you really need to know what that reason is, right? Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to comment on is I was really glad that Hilda spoke of one of the missing voices I felt are those minority teachers. I had heard the figure about 1,000 being available, but I'm not available, but I mean having had the licenses but not working. And I have to mix that with personal experience in our large district here, where minority hiring, minority retention has been really difficult in the second largest district in the state of Oregon with a huge minority population. And the representation is much, in my opinion, much worse than this representation overall the state. And we have teachers leaving, and there's a voice not there, which is the assistant teachers. And those assistant teachers, they sometimes teach the class. Now, I'm not going to say more than the teacher, but there's a lot of them that make or break the ability of the teacher to teach that class. So when we had dozens of instructional assistants who already know the system, they're inside the classroom, they're fully aware of the stress they'd be taking on if they actually went and got their degree, which a lot of them want to. And we've had a couple of experiments when we've taken some instructional assistants, 30 of them, giving them some sort of a path to becoming a teacher. Very difficult program. My own daughter actually went through it 15 years ago. And more than half drop out. It's too difficult, whatever. And then the ones that are left, some of them cannot pass TSPC tests. And their voice has got to be heard here. And they can be teachers much more quickly than our cohort in 8th grade. So I'm hearing a lot of people telling me that, well, we're doing really good. We've got this cohort in 8th grade, 9th grade, or whatever. And that doesn't make me feel good. That doesn't make me feel like, gosh, I'm so glad you're working on it. I don't feel that. It upsets me because there's all these people that could do this within 2 years. And then there's this group of probably a disparity of why. I'm time up already. I'm so sorry. Okay, really quickly. Then, one more missing voice here is the provisional teachers. So we have personal experience with a number of provisional teachers who are, if you sat in their classroom, you'd say teacher of the year. And they cannot get their license. Year after year they try. They can't seem to pass TSBC. Again, this one I think must be language and culture, because all the ones I know are Spanish speaking from different countries. And that's because what is our largest minority in Oregon? Spanish speaking. So that's why it becomes kind of the center of what I see. If they can't pass, then what's happening to the rest? So I see some of them leaving finally because they're so stressed out about losing their job each year. And yet, like I said, teacher of the year material, I've been in their classrooms and so have my children. So that's my input.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I don't think we have any other public comment today. Is there anything else for the good of the order from board members? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.